Welcome to the Innovation Office, a web show brought to you by AmSham to open the doors to the best innovation offices across the country, today in English. And here we dive into how different leaders think, build, and deliver innovation in their companies and teams so that other organizations and leaders can also learn from their experiences. I'm Sara.
And I'm Marco. Today, we will try to understand how innovation is paving the future of our lives through the amazing guest that we have today, Nina Patrick. Nina is the head of innovation of The Warehouse by Champalimaud Foundation, where she is spreading the creation of the world's first digital therapeutic center. The Champalimaud Foundation is a leading biomedical research center and clinic based in Lisbon, in Portugal. And The Warehouse is an innovation hub dedicated to the advancement of digital health solutions and foster the interdisciplinary collaboration. Nina has over 10 years of experience in biotech startups, having previously founded and led her own companies. She holds a PhD in pharmaceutical science and writes a weekly newsletter, Nina's Notes. Very interesting one. You guys should check it out. And she approaches topics like longevity, psychedelics, and digital health. Thank you, Nina, so much for joining us today, and welcome to this humble office.
Thanks, Marco. Thanks, Sarah. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Nina, like Marco was saying, you're spearheading the creation of the world's first digital therapeutics institute at the Champalimaud Foundation, which is a very, very ambitious and groundbreaking initiative. So probably we are looking at the beginning of what can be a lot of different things. But what was at the heart of the development of this project? What is its core mission? And what is it that you define as success for this project, especially as we look at the long-term future?
Yeah, so the Digital Therapeutic Center was an idea between two of the scientists at the Champalimaud Foundation, between Joe Patton and then John Krakauer. And John Krakauer is a quite famous neurologist, neuroscientist from Johns Hopkins, and he's been visiting the Champalimaud Foundation for the past 14 years. And so they cooked up this idea because John invented one of the most true digital therapeutics that's now in the market, which is a immersive game for stroke recovery. So when a patient has a stroke and they lose mobility in their upper limbs, for example, if they do rehabilitation as quickly as possible after the stroke, they have the highest chance of recovery. And a lot of the rehab that you do in the hospital is not very fun. And so John thought that having a game would create more just fun and play and adherence to the protocol. So he created a game that is a dolphin that swims in the sea, and you control it with your body using a robotic vest, which can lift your limbs so that you can guide the dolphin in the three-dimensional space. And the movements you make with the dolphin have been proven to reform neuronal connections in your brain so that you can then learn those movements and gain the mobility back that you lost during the stroke. And that was purchased by a company called MindMaze, which is now commercializing the technology. And they're based in Switzerland, and I think they have a couple centers in the UK and one in Portugal where we have the game. And hopefully, at the Digital Therapeutic Center, we will also have the MindPod Dolphin. And so John wanted to build more things like this. And it takes a lot of different teams in order to create something like that. So for a game like that, you need designers, you need engineers, you need the scientists, neuroscientists, neurologists, you need the patients, and you need to bring all those people together under one roof. And typically, those people are not all in the same place. If you have a science research institute, for example, you don't have a lot of those design groups, and maybe you don't have the engineers that you need. So the vision was to create a space where we can have a neurotech clinic, and then also an innovation space where you have those different teams that then you could use for a variety of different projects, and then also maybe other startups that want to test their technologies, and then next to research and development as well. So bringing that all together under one space. So that's what we're building at the Champalimaud. And we have a beautiful waterfront building that's even more waterfront than our current building. I said I was too far from the sea. I had to be six feet from the sea instead of I don't know, like 100 yards. And so this project is coming along. We need to renovate the building, and so that's one of the big challenges at the moment.
It's very interesting, especially the vision behind. Sometimes it's simple innovations that can have a lot of impact, and your story was very inspiring as also on that point. And the digital therapeutical center is pretty much built on this type of partnership, probably, right? The story that you were telling for the rehabilitation in stroke patients. So how do we innovate with partners? Because it's hard. It's hard to innovate ourselves, and creates a new dimension to innovate with partners. What's your vision on that, and from firsthand experiences?
Yes, so it's complicated because what we have at the Champalimaud Foundation is that we have a lot of fundamental research.
Yep.
So we have scientists that have spent their entire career doing research, not necessarily thinking about how to translate that research into innovation. So really one of the first steps there is just bringing in people that have that industry experience, that know how to create a development plan, and also to have the scientists think a little bit more commercially about their work. So I was brought in to start that first part, which is how do we think about the problems that are happening in the medical world, and how can we then look at the research that's being done here and address those problems with the research. Then you need all the kind of multidisciplinary teams that I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. So we're actually internally hiring several teams. So game developers, engineers, designers, to be able to help with those projects. So we have those people just accessible, and we don't have to partner every time that we want to build a new product. And then, of course, when you want to actually get these things into the hands of patients, you then have to include even more groups. Luckily, we have a lot of those groups already at the Champalimaud, so we will be starting this neurotech clinic to be able to have more access to neuro patients. But we also partner with other groups around Portugal, like CNS, that already has like a patient stream, so that we could test with them. And it all takes a lot of time. You have to have a lot of patience in forming these partnerships, because it's the alignment between all of those groups really does take a lot of time, and making sure that everybody's on the same page. Another tool that we built recently, which is not exactly neuro-focused, but it is a digital tool, is the Cinderella project, which maybe you know.
Yeah, I know.
So that's led by the breast unit at the Champalimaud Foundation, and it's an app that allows women that are going for breast surgery to see what their body is going to look like after the surgery. Right now, it's just they're shown images of women with similar body types to them before and after their surgery, but they're going to be incorporating AI so that the woman will be able to see her own body before and after the surgery and the different types of outcomes that are possible, and then they actually have the chance to say what they would prefer. I actually heard a story just the other day from one of the founders of this project, where she had a patient that had very large breasts that was going for the surgery. And as a doctor, she would have recommended a breast reduction in addition to the tumor removal. And when the patient was presented with that option versus keeping her larger breasts, and maybe they are in a different shape because of the way the surgery went, the patient she's like, I've always seen my body with my large breasts, so having the breast reduction, I wouldn't feel like myself. And so then they were able to guide the surgery in a direction that would make the patient more happy in the end.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly powerful, because a lot of times doctors do make these choices for the patient and actually force that choice on the patient and not allow them to do that. So hopefully we're going to be making more tools like this, and also like the MindPod Dolphin at the center.
Yeah,
Love
it's
it.
really, really cool. And it's really cool to see also the intersection between these two very different worlds, right? Like health and science, and then on the other side, like the entrepreneurial spirit, the digital products. It's you mentioned it. It's two very different skill sets that are needed to create successes in both hands. And it's really interesting to hear you explaining how you're combining both and trying to leverage it, like each other's strengths and uniquenesses. And it's interesting, especially because you have exposure to both worlds, right? Mm-hmm. You are an entrepreneur yourself, so you definitely know the ups and lows of entrepreneurship and digital products like tech on that end. You also were part of the academic world. You had your PhD, and now you're back into this world, and it's really rare to find to find profiles that have this depth of understanding and knowledge in both worlds. Even like I was working at the European Commission in a team that does precisely what you're describing, of helping scientists and researchers actually understanding the entrepreneurial path, like being a bit more commercial oriented, helping them understand how to actually create a product out of their innovation and research. And it's a huge challenge. Like I faced it firsthand, so I definitely can relate to when you're describing the story. But I would really like to understand what were the lessons that you brought from your experience as an entrepreneur, like leading a company, building a product, and especially because you had that experience after you did your PhD. So you had the academic before, you went on to the startup world, then you came back to the academic world, and now you're kind of trying to combine both of these universes. Like, what were the lessons that you brought from that experience, and how did they shape the way that now you approach innovation within the Institute, but in everything that you do at the Champalimaud Foundation?
Yeah, so one of the main lessons now I have learned after being at the Champalimaud for about 1.5 years is to have a bit more patience with everyone. Because I also know how long it took me to upskill when I left the academic world and then when I started my first company. So I had worked in startups before as like the first employee of 2 startups before starting my business. And I then started my business as the CEO. So I came from being pure scientist and just doing science in those companies to now trying to learn how to be a business person. And I know that took me, 3 or 4 years to learn and to iterate through and make mistakes. And so I do want to push my scientists to think more commercially, but I do also still have to have patience with them. One strategy I'm using is just exposing them to other successful entrepreneurs, because I do find sometimes, even though I have the experience, I am a scientist turned entrepreneur, and now I'm trying to help scientists become entrepreneurs, there's still doubt. They're like, oh, Nina, I'm not sure. For us, we're special, so it's going to go differently. And I was like, okay, it is, for sure, just for you. And so I'd like to bring in other experts that can reiterate some of my points and say, oh, yeah, that is how the world works out there. It's not if you build it, they will come. It's really find out if they want it, and then go build it, and then they will come. Because a lot of times it's very easy to just tinker in the lab endlessly and then come out into the world and be like, look, we built this. And everyone's like, oh, we didn't need that. And that's pretty much the worst, because then you waste a lot of time. So I also try to get the scientists to think quite early about the market, who actually is going to buy this product if it becomes a product. I know I was very stubborn about this, though, in the beginning with my company as well, because I was like, no, I know better. And there are cases where sometimes, you have the Steve Jobses of the world who they do know better than everybody else. But so far, there's been one of him. And all the startup books kind of tell you to go through a certain protocol. And so I think it doesn't hurt to try and follow that. And yeah, just look for a real problem, make sure that the market is big enough to support the production of that product, because especially in the medical field, you're going to need hundreds of millions of dollars to bring that to the market. It will not happen with just 10 million unless the path is to go sell it off when it's still in the process. But that needs to be part of the strategy then as well, because then you need to bring those partners in who you think might acquire you very, very early. And basically you're building then for them. And that's a challenge as well, because it is easy just to, keep getting grants and kind of just go into the lab and build.
But that's part of the cool part, I think, about the Champalimaud Foundation. Maybe it's the fact that you have both worlds, right? You have a lot of people that are focused in research, a lot of people that are a little bit more clinical, but do some time in research, and with different backgrounds, creates a very non-uniform DNA for either a startup company, a research center, or even a clinic, if you think about the 3 aspects of the Champalimaud Foundation. So I love that about the story, because like I said, it may be some for some things maybe unique, right? It's us here in this place that can have that. Exactly. And that's a strong message for our viewers that are thinking about how to build a team that can do more than just either research, because it's different phases. If you're doing research and development, you're, like you're saying, in the beginning stage, and the investment and the risk that you're taking is, it's different from if you're building a product. And if you're building a product, you need to think differently. And it's a great share for that. And in this area of medical research, and I wanted to pick your brain on this, because innovation, we had some guests talking about some regulatory issues with many areas, and there are many industries, and we haven't talked about innovation in health, because you were touching point on that. Innovation in health is completely different, because the regulatory restrictions and investment you talked about, even the level of investment, the order of magnitude that you need to bring something that will really change lives of people. We can build an app, and even that, if touches certain points, becomes under the regulations that need to be tested. You need to prove the value of it, and then it becomes a little bit different. So startup and innovation mentality, typical in other areas, and in medical, it's different, right? What's your thoughts on that? What are the big hurdles that you need to overcome?
Sure. So particularly in digital therapeutics, which are evidence-backed interventions. So this is not just kind of the standard digital health app that maybe doesn't have to go through the regulatory approval. Well, digital therapeutics, they do. And so I think a common mistake a lot of founders make is that they think the path will be easier because it's digital. And that has not proven to be the right way to go. I think a digital therapeutic needs to be approached exactly the same way as a therapeutic. So thinking, the playbook is there. It's like we just look to pharma and we see what they do for the regular drugs, and then we need to do that for the digital product as well. So you need to do your market access as early as possible. And you need to be involving all these stakeholders really early, figuring out who's going to pay for it, and working with those insurers very early to understand what outcomes they need to see, which is very commonly overlooked because it's like, well, we're going to make we're going to make a game, and we don't need to involve anyone in it because it's going to be less cost. So therefore, it'll be easier. But it's really that the pharma has figured it out. They know how to do market access. They know how to talk to all the doctors that they need to in order to get that drug prescribed. The same needs to go for digital, and that's definitely just not happening. So that's a big lesson that we need to learn, and that's not really a regulatory problem necessarily, but it's really kind of like a sales strategy problem. It just needs to start much, much, much earlier. And then on the regulatory side, there's a lot of things that are changing. And so people are a little bit confused on what's going on. So for digital therapeutics, they're not always reimbursed, but there are programs like the German DIGA program, which is allowing for the reimbursement of digital apps and therapeutics. But not every country has that type of program. The US has something, I think it's just like the 510K, and you can get things reimbursed. But of course, then you need to take that traditional pharma path if you're going to build a digital therapeutic. So you need it to be reimbursed. So you need it to fit into the system and have some sort of billing code. And then a lot of times founders will also say that they have something brand new. And brand new is very scary to the health insurers. It's much easier if you say, oh, it's just like a video consultation, but now so you can bill it under video consultation. We just have this one extra feature, for example. And it's a little bit easier for them to swallow as opposed to saying, oh, brand new. They're like, oh, no, not brand new. So it's an interesting space to navigate at the moment. But I think founders just need to take it just as seriously as they would as if they were building a medical device or an actual like pharmaceutical product.
Interesting.
And you mentioned a point which I don't think we talk enough about, which is the sales and go-to-market piece, right? Like even before, when you were describing the teams that you're setting up now to actually create these products, it's very much focused on the actual development of the product, right? It does make sense because it's still a research center, and like you're in the earlier stages of anything, any innovation in this field, but it's quite different. If we were talking already about different skill sets from a product world into like a scientific medical world, if we add sales, marketing, like go-to-market strategies on top of it, I feel like it becomes even like more far away than the product itself. Because even within product, you need to understand the technology within it. You need to understand like the logic behind it, and a lot of it. It's the science. But how is it that someone that is leading an innovation, creating something new in the health sector or in any other that can have like a similar background or very heavy science backing needs, how can they develop these go-to-market understanding abilities? Like, how have you seen this? Like, do you agree that it's not something that it's very easy for founders of breakthrough innovations in these spaces to understand or to do well? And if that's the case, like, how can they learn? What can they do to gain those capabilities?
It's definitely a skill that they don't have when they're a scientist. They've never heard of it before because they didn't learn that. Like, I went to science school. I didn't go to business school. So hearing about these things, it's like totally foreign. And so naturally, the way that you think about something when it's new is you sort of think about it as simply as possible. So it's like, oh, go-to-market strategy. Well, I'm selling a product, so I just make the sales. And the patient is the customer. And you're like, no, it is not. And there's all these other levels. And it's a hard thing to learn, and they're very reluctant to do it because it's not necessarily what they want to focus on.
It's a lot like channels, pricing, like so many different nuances.
Exactly. So you need to bring other people in, and so that's where kind of I come in, as well as I would like to have a few more people in the team that could help with being a bit of a business office to help them in understanding what the go-to-market strategy should be, even if it is far off, because go-to-market does actually start quite early when I talked about market access and these types of things you need to do that research really early on when you're still developing so that when you do clinical trials, you're doing the right clinical trials and you don't end up making a big mistake when you end up having the wrong endpoints that nobody really needed to know. And now the health insurer is saying, oh no, that wasn't the endpoint we were looking for. So unfortunately, so it requires a lot of people to be involved, and we can't also expect that our scientists necessarily want to upskill in these areas. So they want to be scientists, or if they do want to be a scientist founder, maybe they want to be the CSO, CTO they want to stay on the science side. Right. So bringing people in to help them, bringing people into their team is absolutely essential. They can think about these things and just guide that part of the development. But it's absolutely crucial to think about very, very early on, because that's also something that I think is overlooked. It's pushed away because it's like, well, we're not there yet because we need the product to be at a prototype stage before we start those things. And I was like, not actually. You can start asking questions and involving customer groups, user groups in the conversation really early. And there's quite a few European funding grants that are innovation grants that want this type of information in the grant, but the scientists are really not familiar with that. So I also try to help them with this, where they don't know what they don't know. They don't necessarily want to have those conversations either. I'm like, it would be really amazing if we could just have 10 conversations with who you think might be a potential customer of this technology. And then they're sort of like, they get a little scared. And I understand that, but then those are the best conversations, because if people actually want what you're building, it's a very fun, satisfying conversation. It's much worse when you call the people up and everyone says they don't want the thing, right. But that's what everyone's afraid to hear, and so they're afraid to have the conversation.
But that's exactly what they need to hear.
They need to hear it
early as possible,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. But sometimes it's shocking. I'll say, hey, let's have those 10 conversations. I swear this will save you 1 to 2 years of your time. Like, if 10 people say no, why are we going to build the thing? Right. And they were like, but we want to build the thing. And I was like, okay, well, then know that you're doing a research project, and that's also fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're like, well, it might turn into a product. I'm like, well, let's have those 10 conversations, 50 conversations, 100 conversations, and that will give us the proof to know that it can turn into a product.
Yeah. But I think that's part of the issue is we're as engineers, scientists, deep technical people, we like the technical challenge. Mm-hmm. So that's there. Independently of the product, the technical challenge will be solved by the end of it. So the fun part is that for a business person, the fun part is the other part, the part of we're finding out which true problem in life of everyday life of a patient in this case, would it change? Does it change anything? Maybe not, because there's not a problem there to be solved, or just a conceptual problem that we're either a little bit early. Sometimes I think that's the problem, right? We're coming in a little bit early to solve a problem that's not yet reached the masses. Therefore, there's no insurance that will cover that because, well, that's 10% of the population, or even 10% could be very much, to be honest.
Yeah. Sometimes the problem is there, it's just not big enough, right? They all need to read the lean startup.
I think that's the biggest problem, is that the problem is there, it's just not big enough, and then that's a very sad bit of information to deliver. Yeah. Because yes, when you need to raise 100 million for your product, if the problem is too small, then you're not going to be able to justify raising that much capital.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you find it through other ways, and then it just is a longer path.
Cool. And you write a newsletter, Nina, yourself, where you talk a lot about, as Marco was mentioning at the beginning, psychedelics, digital therapeutics as well, longevity. And all of these topics actually are kind of in right now. Like a lot of people are talking about them. A lot of people are like paying attention to them even more. So like, I'm not sure, and you can maybe tell us if it's more research that is happening, and therefore we are like finding more about all of these different spaces and how they can actually impact our lives moving forward. Or if it's just that we are becoming a bit more curious about them, or we start feeling ourselves that we'll probably live longer, therefore we might need to start planning a bit for a longer lifespan. Why do you think these topics are converging now, are kind of in this highlight? And why is it that you write about them? Why did you think it was important to share all of these insights? And those are very cool insights.
Yeah, very.
Literally, like you said, Marco. But why? Why is it important now?
I think, okay, so you have a couple questions in there, but the first I'll answer why I write the newsletter.
Yep.
So I started the newsletter over 2 years ago, and it comes out every week on Wednesdays. And so, yeah, this week was 109 was last week, which is wild because when I first started, I thought writing 10 of them was going to be impossible.
The best projects are like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Now it's such a part of my routine. But I started writing it because my friends ask me, I'm the only scientist in the group of friends. And so I get asked a lot of questions about science, and I explain things to my friends, and they say that I do a very good job explaining. And I was like, okay, maybe more people want to hear my explanations on different types of science topics. So I started writing, and I chose longevity and psychedelics because my PhD was in epigenetics, which is now very tightly tied with longevity. And I also done a small research project on psychedelics as well. So I looked at the effects of MDMA on the rat brain. And I wanted to dive back into those areas and see what was going on in the field, because I sort of stepped away from those areas after my PhD for about 8 years, and then I was really kind of just out of the space. So it was a way to keep me updated and also to then educate. And I do feel like these topics are really interesting at the moment because there's been a bit of mistrust with the healthcare system because healthcare is really more sick care. It's very reactive. And it's not about keeping people healthy at the moment. It's about just getting people better. And I think the general public, after the pandemic, just started to feel a bit differently about how they view healthcare and how they view the food we're eating, and just how we're all kind of having this general obesity epidemic, especially in the US, where I'm from. I mean, it's like 92% of American adults are metabolically unhealthy, which is absolutely insane to think about. And this has, I think, kind of jaded everybody on how they feel about the healthcare system. And so this is my kind of piece of doing my part about educating about different science and health topics, so in a voice that people trust, so that people can feel more comfortable about these things. We also may see some of the first psychedelics being legalized we're seeing it happen in other countries, but maybe for the first time in the US. And a lot of people are quite scared about psychedelics because, I mean, when I grew up, we had a whole program. It was like DARE to keep kids off drugs. And there was a lot of, I don't want to necessarily call it propaganda, but there was a lot of information being put out there about how drugs melt our brains and this types of stuff. And this scared everybody, but really these can be very powerful healing tools. And so I'm also just putting information out there with scientific backing that shows that these things are safe and can be used in certain types of environments very safely to have good results. So, and there is sometimes a thread being pulled between psychedelics and longevity, but it's very new research. And I would like to see, that would be very cool if those two things really come together more powerfully, at least, or psychedelics being used for different types of care. I cover lots of different topics. Also because I work at a neuroscience research institute, I'm covering a lot more neuroscience at the moment as well, which is very fun things to write about, like love and heartbreak and sex on the brain and what happens then. Very fun reads. And then, of course, things that get a bit more technical as well.
I need to salute you and thank you for the contribution, because I do think, like you said, I love the story. Started out with a group of friends, but truth be told, you're giving back to the community, not just a group of friends, but well, kudos to your friends as well to realizing that you could contribute that, because I do believe that a lot of these topics are still a little bit, some of them are taboo, some of them are complex, and because of their complexity became out of reach, and you're making it really easy. And I agree with your friends. It's really an easy read to read your newsletter, and the fact that you've been doing it for 109
Yeah,
segments.
it's wild.
It's wild. So congratulations,
Thank
Nina.
you.
It's very, very interesting. And you touched point on one point that I want to highlight, and I want to give back to you again, is the fact that it's really hard in an innovation space to be always up to date. You picked up a very cool approach that for yourself, that I want to keep updated on this. It's not part of my day. It was some time in the past, but I'm interested in that. I'm going to build a newsletter. I think for most of our viewers, this would be a great example, but not to the reach of all of them. So how do you think, and how you see your teams, and how to motivate these teams? So for most of our viewers could be entrepreneurs that have their teams that they need to keep updated, and they need to keep the team motivated to keep updated. Because if you're not up to date and you want to be creative, it's very hard, because most of our innovations is built on the shoulders of others, and they're very high shoulders today. There's a lot of good things coming out, and the pace with AI, with all the tech, and especially in your field, deep tech, is even greater. So I would love to hear your insights on how to keep us up to date. So what do you think?
I think going to events is a very good one.
Good point.
I mean, we just had Web Summit last week, and so it's great to just see what everybody's working on. Of course, these are companies that are a bit more mature, so they had the idea of what they wanted to build, 5, 10, maybe even 20 years ago, and now it's booming.
Yep.
And so as a founder, you do have to be a bit ahead of the curve, thinking about what's going to be popular maybe 10 years from now. Or not popular, but what is going to be a problem 10 years from now that we need to solve. But I think having a good network going to events and having a good network of people is absolutely essential. Seeing what other people are working on, bouncing ideas off of people is probably what's kept me the most up to date. And I worked in startups for about 8 years, 10 years. And I have a huge network of startup founders who are always sort of digging into new problems. And those conversations are amazing. So if you can get out there and talk to startup founders and make friends with them and hang out with them, you're going to be continually inspired. It makes me feel that there's so much hope in the world, that we're going to we're going to solve problems in healthcare. We're going to solve problems in climate tech. Absolutely. Of course, writing about what you learn is also just a great way to share with your friends and share with other people, and then also make sure you understood what you learned so that you can repeat it back to somebody. And then just use all the tools yourself as well. So especially with AI, there's like new AI tools coming out almost like every day, and just get in there and use it. I still can't believe I have friends that don't use large language models. It just blows my mind. Even some of my colleagues are like, "Oh, I don't use ChatGPT." I'm like, how? I use ChatGPT every day, like multiple times a day. And now I'm using, I just found out about Notebook LM, which is absolutely a cool tool. It creates a podcast of a note in seconds, and then I edit my own podcast in Riverside. Incredible AI tools that take out all the filler words and pauses, again, in seconds. It's like, what? Who's wasting their time not using these tools? So get out there and use them, because then you'll also see what comes out, because as soon as there's an update, you can see how people are using it, and then people will be writing about it as well. I think it's just like, don't be scared to put yourself out of your comfort zone in order to stay up to date.
Oh, it's amazing. And the follow-up on that is the fact that in health, I think the impact has to do with the productivity that you can have, because especially not in the researcher area, but I'm thinking doctors, they are so spread thin. And if we don't embed from the beginning these tools, productivity tools and creative tools that can circumvent some of the traditional problems that you see in the day by day, and if we still build them in that sense, traditional, we will always be hitting the same walls and not overcoming our hurdles that we need all to overcome. So thank you so much. It's a great inspiration and share.
Maybe one last question for you, Nina, before we wrap up. we've just discussed some ideas of how we can all get a bit more inspired and like up to date in development in our fields, get a bit of like some creativity triggers. But if now we look a bit more onto the organizational side, what would you say, like what would be your suggestions, ideas, recommendations for all the organizations out there, especially in Portugal, that want to innovate more, better? They want to maybe leverage partners, like we've discussed already, being it like research centers, startups, universities. What would you say they can do on their side to become either more interesting or more attractive to these kind of partners? And how can they, also based on your experience as a founder, but in the other fields as well, how can they become better innovation partners and do better innovation?
I think focusing on solving their own internal problems is a really good place to start. So I think sometimes companies want to innovate because they want to change their product, and they're like, okay, we need to have a big innovation on the current product. But then internally, they have a lot of just issues of anything that can come up. So, for example, we have a hospital, and we also have, the research on the other side. We have tons of problems that we can solve internally, which is, what you mentioned before is interoperability between all of the different types of computer systems that are slowing down our doctors, being able to optimize wait times for the call center so that patients, or when they do get on a call, the patient information is already there, or they could have been filling out a survey while they were holding instead of having to then answer all those questions. There's so many problems that are just right there in front of us, but we sort of overlook because the system works, I guess. And it's much more fun to build something new and shiny and big. Even though when you do solve your own internal problems, probably there's a lot of other people out there that have that same problem. So you could build something that can be really, really powerful, scalable. And then if you deploy it in our case, within our own hospital, and it's working, we can say, look,
Showcase.
Showcase, we did a pilot and it's working great. And now we want to do this at, your hospital. So obviously in our situation, we have a very unique space to be able to innovate like this. In other corporations, I think also looking internally is a great place to start, because if you can also optimize the way that your teams run, then you just become a lot more productive. If you want to bring in external partners, of course, there's lots of partners that have probably solved that problem for you and then want to build the solution into your company. But I think if you have the problem yourself, you're also just a really good advocate for wanting to solve it, because you can say, this has affected me every single day. When you're building a product that is solving a problem that maybe doesn't directly affect you as much, it's a little bit harder of a story. It's a less compelling story. And then the funders and everybody involved really, really like to hear it when it's like my personal problem I'm solving.
Yeah, it creates perspective always in the empathy that you need to take care of someone else's problem versus the empathy that you need to take care of your own problem is completely different levels. And your level of commitment and everything will always vary. But I do believe that sometimes, and I'm that type of person, that type of profile that would go for the shiny thing. And I understand completely that that's a lot more cool to solve and to work on than, everyday mundane things that are working. And you're right.
Exactly.
It's not that they're not working, it's that they could work better,
Yeah,
right?
they could work better, or people haven't even thought about how much better they could work. And then all of a sudden you bring in an AI tool and it's summarizing everything for you, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that is what we needed. We didn't realize. So yeah, I think there's still so many problems out there to solve, and they can still be really, really big problems, even if it is something that's sort of happening kind of just like right at your doorstep. And those are the easiest ones to solve too.
Totally.
Cool. Thank you. And this wraps up this episode of the Innovation Office. Today with a bit more of a scientific, yet quite entrepreneurial perspective on innovation, which, as we could hear from Nina, is key for our future as a society in all these different fields we touched on.
Thank you, Nina, very much for everything that you shared, for the incredible inspiration and insight that everyone who's watching for sure loved, and it was amazing contribution. A special thanks also to Altis Portugal for having us in this great studio and the partnership with us on this initiative. And of course, to you all who tuned in and are watching us and supporting us. Thank you so much.
And you know the drill? This store will open again in 2 weeks for the next episode. We're counting on you to join us. And until then, keep building the future and creating epic stories of innovation so we can share them in this web show soon. See you.
See you.